Hi guys, my name is Jules. I'm founder and CEO of The New Co. This year for International Women's Day, we really wanted to share insights about what it means to be a female entrepreneur. The global pandemic has disproportionately affected women, particularly women of colour in the workplace. And the UN's theme for International Women's Day this year is women in leadership in light of a COVID-19 world. So we really want to take this opportunity to share insights, hopefully have a useful conversation if you are a woman who is thinking about what her next steps are. We'll be talking to two women I greatly admire. One of them is our investor, Laurie Cashman. She backed us back when the New Co was only 2 months old. And Babba, who is the founder and CEO of Ceremonia. She's also had the pleasure of becoming a new mum and launching a new business in the middle of the pandemic. So I hope that you guys find the conversation interesting. I know I'm really excited about it. So yeah. Firstly, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really, really excited to be talking to you today. I think, you've had really the unique experience of becoming a mother and also launching a new venture, all in the midst of a global pandemic. So how's it going? How's baby Alma?
Oh, I've loaded question on how it's going because it changes like by the minute. So
Yeah.
it's been fantastic though. I think I couldn't think of a better time actually to go through pregnancy than during the global pandemic, which sounds super weird, but truth be told, it really helped me to take a few steps back and like not be traveling. My husband was not traveling. We were both home and we're able to really nest. Yeah, I think it was like the best preparation into this new chapter to just like take a few steps back and not be running like a crazy person on airports every week.
I love that that's the way that you're seeing things, but really from an outsider's perspective, we're like, oh my gosh, she's launching a company, she's having a baby. But yeah, I mean, I want to sort of tap into Ceremonia. I know that when you launched and I first saw the campaign, I immediately sent you a message. Sort of coming from a Latina background myself, it just really hit home. So I would love to hear sort of your background story and what led you to create Ceremonia.
Yeah, I mean, actually, in terms of like launching a company during the pandemic, far from ideal, but at the same time, what I will say is that we have been so extremely efficient. I think we wouldn't have gotten this far with these small resources at this short amount of time in any other time. I feel like
Yeah.
because everything was remote and everyone had to sort of just get with the times, we were able to accomplish so much in such a short amount of time. Just take something like fundraising. Like before, to fundraise, you were on a road show, meeting investors in the West Coast, East Coast, like if you were meeting with someone in Europe, you had to travel to Europe and pitch. Like now I did all of that out of my closet in Brooklyn.
Right.
But in terms of Ceremonia, gosh, I feel like everything I have done in my career has sort of led me on this path. I'm a Latina, obviously myself. Both my parents are from Chile, which actually most people don't realize. I think some people think I'm like half Latina.
I find it really interesting because I'm sure for you, for anybody who has Latin heritage, I think generally, whether you're half or you're full Latina, you always just feel Latina because it's usually like the personality that comes with being Latina sort of overpowers a lot of other cultures. And I've always felt like such a Latina, but people always say to me like, oh, I didn't realize that you were. So
Yeah.
why do you think that people don't realize that you are a Latina or a woman of color?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that there are so many stereotypes when it comes to specifically the Latinx demographic because there's no such thing as just like a Latin look, but the only Latina that we get to see in the media is someone like Eva Longoria, who, is very curvy, she's short, she's like very sexy, and loves to, get the attention of the men. Like that's sort of like the stereotypical Latina. And I am so the opposite. And I think because I have so much influence from growing up in Sweden, I wear a lot of Scandinavian designers. I don't wear any makeup. Like I'm very stripped down. That doesn't fit with people's stereotypical idea of who the Latina woman is or should be. I also just don't think that we see enough Latinas in business.
Right.
Like Latinas running big companies is just not something I grew up with. I think people seeing me being a businesswoman immediately gets them to think that I must, have that from my family, or that I can't be Latina and a businesswoman.
It's interesting, sort of like you say, what is carried with sort of the Latin heritage and all of these sort of stereotypes. So sort of coming from that community, what then sort of led you to create Ceremonia?
I grew up in Sweden, so in a very Chilean household, salsa on repeat. So I grew up, very Latin, but in a Swedish society. And in Sweden, where I grew up in a small town. There were just no one like me. Like in my school, I was the only brown kid. Like my mom had a lot of Latin friends, and we would do, like fiestas de chilenos, like all the Chileans coming together for salsa parties. But in my sort of like other perspective in life, like school, sports, anything that I did as a kid, I was always the only one. And all my friends were blonde and blue-eyed and super sweet and nice. But I think just growing up like that, never seeing yourself represented, really builds a little bit of a trauma in you that I don't think I realized until now, especially now becoming a parent myself. And then when I moved to Stockholm, to the capital of Sweden, I moved and studied, and eventually started working at Uber, and I was part of launching Uber in Sweden. And I got into this more like international career trajectory. I started to meet other sort of immigrants, not necessarily Latins, but people from Persian backgrounds or Muslims, or other immigrants who had grown up in Sweden similarly to me, with a very sort of like immigrant family, but
Right.
they were very Swedish in the sense that they would dress Scandinavian, they spoke the language perfectly. And I think that was the first time I started to see myself identified and represented. However, still no representation of someone like me in media or products that I consumed. And it wasn't until I eventually moved to New York that I sort of realized this sort of insane gap where all the brands that I worked with were founded by white founders, sort of targeting white millennials, and all the people I hanged out with were sort of like, white millennials. Yet the US population accounts for 20% of Hispanics. There's such a disconnect in like the bubble that I'm in and the US population. And as I started to talk about my Latinidad a little bit more, I realized that I actually had Latin friends that I didn't even know were Latin. But then I still felt the disconnect between like, okay, so I live in a country now where 20% are Hispanics. I have a couple of friends who are like me. They're, business women and Latinas. However, where are the big brands founded by Latinas? And where are the brands that really represent the Latinx demographic and that really sort of celebrate the richness of the Latin culture with pride? So in the creation of Ceremonia, before I even knew that it was going to be a hair care brand, I just knew it was going to be a brand that was here to empower and celebrate the richness of the Latin culture. So it was sort of started with that value, and then we sort of decided to tap into the hair care category.
I just think I think it's an absolutely beautiful brand, and I think that what you're doing in terms of your mission of representing Latinas, both from a product perspective, but also as a founder, and as a mother, is something that's really important right now.
Totally.
When you're looking at the sort of fundraising landscape, I mean, the statistics are crazy, right? It's like less than 100 women have raised as much capital as you have. Why is there such a gap in funding?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that so little funding even goes to women, just period. So then add women of color, add Latina to that, like you're just like getting a tinier piece of the pie. I think when it comes to Latinx, you have to see it to believe it. Like I always talk about how growing up, the wildest dream I could have was to work in an office, because anyone I looked at in my family or my family's friends, they didn't have any office jobs. Like they worked in a restaurant, or my mom used to clean schools and toilets, and like my dad used to, repair cars, like very sort of like hands-on physical work. To think about having a job that was more about your intellect versus your physicality was a wild leap. It wasn't until I started to talk to my white friends' parents about their jobs and just got interested in what they were doing that I started to sort of open my mind into professions that I didn't even know existed. I actually had never heard of marketing, and like it almost brings me like tears to think back of like little like innocent 17-year-old Babba who, did not know what marketing was. And I was working in an eyewear store alongside my studies. And there used to be some like distributors come to the store to like introduce us to brands that they wanted us to buy. And I remember like asking one of the guys, I was like, what's your job? And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, yeah, no, but like, what did you study? Like to like do this? Like, what is this? And like, what job is this? He was like, oh, like it's considered marketing and sales. He's like, I studied like economics and international marketing and sales. And I was like fascinated. Like, and after that, I went to Google marketing. And now with social media, people can get exposed to much more, a wide variety of, career paths. But for me, like that was the first time I heard of marketing.
I had basically the exact same experience. I remember being at school and being like, well, I like business and I sort of like philosophy, but I also like art and creativity. Like what's at the intersection of all of these things? Thinking about sort of gender roles within the Latin community, do you think that these are evolving? I mean, I think for me personally, I have like the most supportive parents, the most supportive family, but I think there was like a moment in time where I sort of had to make it clear that actually I wanted to really prioritize my career, perhaps over and above what might have been expected of me, i.e. having children earlier or taking on more of a sort of traditional like wife role in my own family. Did you have a similar experience, or do you think that there are still sort of women in our community that are still, like you said, they almost haven't had their eyes sort of open to actually the possibilities?
The reason I am on Instagram, like I don't need to be there for my own sake. Like I just want to show a different path. I take pride in that. Growing up, that was not the case. And my mom, she would like basically tell me how her friends' daughters were so helpful. Look at so and so's daughter. She helps her mom cook every night. Yeah. She sets the table. And I'm like, and does she get straight A's? And my mom is like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, maybe you should ask her that, because your daughter doesn't have time to do laundry or set the table, because guess what? I'm like studying day and night and I'm like at the top of my class. I had to like always like justify my decisions and like really fight back for like my position in life. My dad was always very proud of me because I think he saw a lot of himself in me, but God forbid we would get in an argument, because then he would think that as a woman, I should, not be so atrevida, like not speak up against, like an older man. So it was like this double standard, like, and I really grew up with, my family telling me that you can't speak up against adults, like respect adults, they always know better. And that was very confusing to me, because in school, my Swedish teachers would teach me the opposite. They would like teach me to be an independent thinker and really encourage me to question if I didn't agree with something. So it was sort of this double standard where in school I would get celebrated for raising my hand and be like, actually, sir, I disagree. And if I would do that at dinner at home, my mom would be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, Barbara.
Yeah, I think what I find so interesting is that actually by nature, immigrant communities have a lot of what I call entrepreneurial qualities. I think how many people could you really drop in a sort of new country with like $200 in their pocket and say, go out and thrive? And, I think that those are sort of qualities that live within us and sort of get passed on. But I think that, like you say, sort of representation and really opening people's eyes to the idea that we can put those skills to work in ways that are amazing and far more meaningful and really contribute to society is so important. I mean, I can't relate more to you. The relationship with my mom, again, it's like now she's like the most supportive person and it sort of becomes a joke.
And it's funny, my mom has been wanting grandkids for so long. So she's obviously super happy now, but I think she also now recognizes what a difference it is to have a child when you plan for it, both financially and like emotionally. Like we really desired this baby and we have, set up a life around it that works. And my mom was telling me the other day how she was like, wow, this is such a beautiful way to parent. And she was saying how like she wished she would have, waited a little bit and like had a better situation, especially with her first child. She had my brother when she was 20. They barely had running water. She underestimated the like financials of raising a child. And, you know, so I think there is something beautiful in that, how we can learn from each other. And I appreciate so much that my mom, despite having gone a very different route than I have, she's not putting any judgment on my decisions.
Right.
She's very much watching my journey with admiration.
Yeah, of course she is. I mean, I think so many women are, and not to like bow down to you too much, but I think that's another thing that really sort of spurred me on to have this conversation with you, because I think being really open and honest about motherhood, particularly for women that are trying to run a company, is something that's really important. I think we put such a huge amount of pressure on ourselves as to the type of mother that we want to be. And I know that there's a lot of guilt with regards to trying to be there for your employees and your investors, and also be the mother that you sort of, you long to be. So how have you sort of approached that? I know that you've been vocal about sort of taking a day off work every week and sort of getting a night nurse. How are you sort of finding sort of the balance, and why is it so important for you to be vocal and honest about your approach?
I, for the longest time, feared having kids because I really thought that having kids meant erasing your identity to make space for motherhood, because all the examples I ever saw were women dropping their careers to be full-time moms, or going down in time to part-time and eventually not being fulfilled because they were not growing. It's hard to grow in a career at a part-time capacity. So then eventually just like dropping the career altogether. Or I would see standalone moms like my mom really, you know, struggling to make life go around financially. So having a career was like a joke. Like that would be nice, but I don't even have like time to shower. So how about that? So I really grew up thinking that motherhood was extremely hard, a huge sacrifice, something that was all consuming, and it could only be one way. Like either you're a mother or you're not. And I have worked so hard my entire life to build the independence that I have today, to build a career that I have, and I don't feel like giving that away. And that doesn't mean I love my baby any less. And that doesn't mean that I'm not spending quality time with her. It just means that I am setting up my life in a different way. I recognize that there is a lot of privilege that goes into the way I'm living my life. Being able to afford help, or being able to, you know, have a mom. My mom is helping me right now and has been for the past 2 months. Being able to have a mom that's healthy and available to help me this way is also privilege. So privilege is not just financial, it's also the sort of relationships that you have, and the fact that I have a good relationship with my mom. I recognize that my way is not like, I can't just be promoting it as like, guys, it's easy, do just like I do. Like I understand that that's not maybe available to everyone at all times, but it is an optionality. And if you have the means to, and if you have like worked before you know, have a baby, if you build a career of some sort before. And I'm also not saying that that's what everyone should do. Like some people want to have babies and then have a career, or they don't care about a career, and that's totally fine too. I think for me, I just wanted to showcase that the sort of like dream that I have had growing up is indeed possible. It's not easy, but it is possible.
Yeah, I mean, again, that sort of representation is so important. All of the women that I know who have had children praise having children for their ability to be critical thinkers and be super and hyper efficient with their time. So going sort of back to funding, because I think it's a really important conversation to be had. And I think sort of moving away from maybe the things that we can do in terms of representation in the community, what would your advice be to maybe a woman who is looking to fundraise, who does come from a minority background?
I really believe in like peer mentorship and like peer networking. I have maybe got some of like my best advice and access to network through some of those women in my network. Is there anyone who, you know, you has a relatable story to yours that has just done that journey? And I would say ideally someone who is just like a couple of steps ahead of you versus someone who did it, you know, 10 years ago, because the context and the relevancy in the advice that you'll get from someone that's just a couple of steps ahead is so much more valuable. The other thing I would say is understanding that part of the process is getting a lot of no's. You're going to get 99% no, and then 1% yes, and those are the ones you go with. I think I underestimated the dynamics of fundraising. I think initially got a little personal for me, where I was like, wait, they said no? What? They don't believe in me? And there's so many reasons why someone will say no that has nothing to do with you or your business. Like It can be the way their LPs have set up the policies for how they can use the funds. There's so many things, so just okay, on to the next. So that's why having a big outreach list like ready to go is, the way to go. And I think when you're fundraising, do that fully. Like that is your job at the time. So I think having a couple of meetings here and there is really not gonna get you the results that you can have if you really focus.
It's a full-time job, and I think you have to use the no's as almost information feedback fuel. I mean, a lot of the times, people are coming back to you with insights that make sense to me, and I was like, absolutely, we do need to pivot, absolutely.
I think that's such a good, input as well. And honestly, sometimes these investors will, ask you questions that you have spent 0 minutes thinking about.
Right.
And I would just feel so grateful that I'm now getting the opportunity to spend time on this, because when you're running a business, you're just like, go, go, go. And investor conversations really force you to take a few steps back and look at your business holistically and like in the grand scheme of the big global economy, like where do you fit in and where are you heading? I felt really grateful for some of those due diligence processes that we went into and had to compile a ton of documentation that we didn't have. But after having done it, we were all, so much stronger and better positioned to run the business.
I think that's such great advice for anybody that is looking to fundraise, because I didn't go to business school. I don't come from that type of background. I literally learned everything on the job. And just like you, I think I must have had hundreds of meetings. And that was really how I built up my business plan. By the end of it, I actually had quite a promising business plan and was able to raise. But I think that's really great advice in terms of just making sure that you're gathering enough insights and information so that really you're able to do the homework up front. But with regards to sort of what's happening now, and I know it touches upon a lot of the sort of topics that we've spoken about, but women in the workplace, particularly women of colour in the workplace, are really disproportionately being affected throughout COVID. What do you think is happening? Why do you think it's happening? And what do you think we can all do about it sort of coming out of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, the fortunate reality is that we have lost all of our societal like support, with the daycare, public schools. The way it worked for both parents to work was that the kids were taken care of in some sort of, governmental institution. And with school moving to remote, someone has to take care of the child. Like they have to be fed. We have to make sure that they're using the screens to be on school and not be on YouTube. Like there's so much like hand holding that goes into that. And I think unfortunately, the second there is more to do at home, the women are the first one to take on that extra sort of like unrecognized labor. It's impossible to do that and do a full-time job. I just think a lot of women have had to, do what's best for their families. I also think that because we have an inequality in terms of the pay gap still, that also affects. So if you have two, incomes in a household, one makes a ton more money than the other one. If one has to go and, focus on the child, it's 9 out of 10 times going to be the person who makes the least. Right. And that oftentimes is the woman. I think the pandemic has really heightened all the inequalities that we have always had, but have sort of like been able to like see between the fingers. And then now it's just crystal clear that we are so not equal and this country doesn't have any support. I was reading that we have fewer women in the workplace now than we had a decade ago. We have like taken a decade's time of a step back as a result of the pandemic. And I honestly get goosebumps just talking about it. It's just like so sad. And like, it's hard for me sometimes to be a public person on social because I am coming from such a place of privilege today. Like, that's not to say I come from privilege. I, grew up in the projects, whatever, I'm self-made, but still my situation today is very privileged. And that's just not the reality for most women. And hopefully what will come out of this is that the US finally implements some sort of welfare or support for mothers and families.
It should not be in question and it should be a very simple solution. And I completely agree with you. I think I really hope that it will bring about change. But I definitely think that we also need to have a conversation around when are we really going to deconstruct these gender sort of stereotypes and roles, because I think that the wage gap is, something that is obvious and so important to talk about. And it should be, hopefully, an easy change that we make in the future. But I think that the moment when a woman has a child, I think the day that we can have like an honest and open conversation with our partners and say, who wants to stay at home this time? And that there's no sort of stigma around that at all, is really the day that we're going to make progress. And I've always said that. That's why I think particularly around sort of International Women's Day, and I think some people have sort of raised their eyebrows sometimes when I say we really need to be including all genders in this conversation of equality, because until we've sort of deconstructed these stereotypes, there isn't actually ever going to be change. Like you say, it's sort of just...
Totally. If men don't realize that they are, part of the equation, then we're not gonna, like, it can't be a women's issue. In our household, it's just very clear that the baby is an equal responsibility. So there either needs to be a system that allows both to work, or there needs to be a division, so there are many ways for men to be involved and supportive, and I think that's important for men to realize that responsibility.
Totally. Well, Babba, thank you so much. It's been so great chatting to you. Like I said, I think that you're very inspiring as a female Latina founder who is a new mum. I think you've given us so many sort of insights and basically information that we can hopefully all put to work. So thank you so much. We'll see you soon, Babba.
See you. Thank you.